Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Needless to say, she will be missed. So I'd like to, at this point, take a moment to honor the legacy of Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who, as I said, passed away last week. During her nearly 20 years on this committee, she served on every subcommittee and left her mark on all of them. As every single one of us in this room know, there was no more fierce an advocate than Congresswoman Jackson Lee, and she directed her passion to making the homeland safer and more secure. She was dedicated to oversight, asking pointed questions of government and private sector witnesses alike, and pressing for hard answers. She was a prolific legislator who took pride in writing her own legislation and improving the bills of her colleagues through amendments. Congresswoman Jackson Lee fought for resources for first responders, help for those suffering the effects of natural disasters, and immigration policies that reflect our values as a nation of immigrants. Congresswoman Jackson Lee's reputation across Capitol Hill was similarly impressive. Indeed, it often appeared she could be in more than one place at a time. Within 1 hour, the Congresswoman could be observed giving a floor speech, participating in a committee hearing on a topic she cared about, and then giving remarks at an event to support a cause. She was a reluctant and relentless public servant, and every cause she took on was better because of it. The nation owes her a debt of gratitude. I'm grateful that Congresswoman Jackson Lee decided to lend her immeasurable energy and tenacity to our committee. Her absence will be felt just as much as her presence, and we will miss her dearly. Today, we continue our prayers for her family, friends, and constituents. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I ask that all members of the committee please rise and join me in observing a moment of silence to honor Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee's memory. Thank you. The purpose of this hearing is to examine the assassination attempt against former President Donald Trump that took place July 13th. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. On July 13th, 2024, our nation came within an inch of an unmitigated tragedy and crisis. In Butler, Pennsylvania, a 20-year-old gunman mounted a building in plain view of former President Donald J. Trump's campaign rally, took aim, and fired multiple rounds. At exactly the right moment, however, President Trump turned his head to read a chart so that a bullet which would have pierced his skull instead grazed his ear. 3 others sitting behind President Trump on the stage experienced a different fate. 50-year-old Corey Comparator, a father and former fire chief, was struck and killed. As one outlet recently reported, this brave and loving man, quote, spent his final moments diving down in front of his family, protecting them from the gunfire that rang out, end quote. He is survived by his wife and 2 daughters. 2 others, 57-year-old David Dutch and 74-year-old James Copenhaver, were seriously injured. I'd like to pause for a moment of silence in remembrance of Corey and in prayer for the recovery of David and James. Thank you, everyone. This failed attempt on President Trump's life demands urgent and comprehensive congressional oversight. We must understand how it happened to ensure that changes are made so this never happens again. That was the scene last Saturday, where thousands of Americans were exercising their constitutional rights until they were viciously attacked. Yet what we saw after those shots rang out should also encourage everyone. We saw a leader under fire rising up to show the attacker had failed. We saw brave Secret Service agents who put their bodies in harm's way. And we see Americans across this nation refuse to let this thwart their participation in our democratic process. At the same time, however, we also witnessed a massive security failure by the Secret Service and the Department of Homeland Security. The closest someone has been to taking the life of a president or presidential candidate since Ronald Reagan was shot in 1981, more than 40 years ago. We must be committed in our determination to ensure that this never happens again. That is why the House Committee on Homeland Security is demanding full transparency and accountability. That's why we made a trip to Butler, Pennsylvania yesterday to see the site for ourselves. I'm grateful to the ranking member and the 11 other members who were able to come yesterday. And I want to share with the American people some of what we saw yesterday. I, for one, was struck by how close the unsecured building from which Thomas Crooks took his shot was to the stage where President Trump was standing. What we saw yesterday only raises more questions about how this roof was unsecured. And after several of our committee members climbed on the roof, let me tell you, any excuse about the roof being too steep to post a counter sniper team up there is pure nonsense. Protecting the President of the United States and presidential nominees is the Secret Service's mission. There can be no room for mistakes. Unfortunately, that was not the case here. In order to prevent a repeat of this, we must first thoroughly gather and assess the facts. And that's why we're here today. Most importantly, to obtain answers for the American people from officials in the best position to provide those answers. And like tens of millions of Americans, our list of questions is extensive. Why was the rooftop which the shooter fired multiple rounds not secured? Who made the decision not to post a counter sniper personnel on the roof or in a place better to cover the roof? Were warnings from private citizens in attendance about a shooter on top of the building heard by federal law enforcement? And if so, why was nothing done to respond? How did the shooter access the rooftop despite reported federal and local law enforcement presence in and around the building? Were there communication breakdowns that prevented law enforcement officials from effectively communicating with each other in response to alerts and threats? The shooter was spotted and designated as a suspicious person prior to President Trump taking the stage. Why wasn't President Trump moved to a secure location until the Secret Service could investigate? The shooter visited the rally site multiple times before the actual rally. Reports indicate he even flew a drone on a reconnaissance trip to the rally site on the day of the attack. Why wasn't the site secure? Following the rally, the Secret Service said that reports President Trump's security detail requested additional security resources were false. However, then backtracked and told the Washington Post that the Secret Service had learned new information, indicating the Secret Service headquarters may have in fact denied some requests. Why and when were those requests denied? These are just some of the most pressing questions we have and expected to hear answers from Secretary Mayorkas and Director Wray and Director Cheadle. We also expect to hear answers and questions about the shooter's motivation and what the FBI has found in its investigation, including information collected from the shooter's various devices. Unfortunately and unacceptably, they have refused to appear before the committee today. Director Cheadle testified yesterday before another committee, but many questions remain. Yesterday, she provided wholly unacceptable responses to members of the House Oversight Committee and completely failed to address the lack of confidence both sides of the aisle have in her leadership of the Secret Service. Her appearing before one committee yesterday also does not absolve her of her responsibility before this committee. In any case, make no mistake, we will continue to push for answers. While these Federal officials refused to testify today. We're grateful for the opportunity to speak with law enforcement members about the events of that tragic day. Their testimony will be critical to putting together this complicated puzzle, understanding coordination efforts, and getting to the truth about what happened. Before I conclude, however, I have to urge the ranking member to reconsider his legislation that was clearly intended to strip Secret Service protection from President Trump. While I understand the legislation would not have applied in this instance, it was clear to everyone that it was directed toward former president. We all introduce messaging bills. This one should be withdrawn. Today's hearing is critical so we can ensure that our children and grandchildren will grow up in a free nation where every American can participate in the democratic process. I hope every member will join me in getting to the bottom of what happened so that it doesn't happen again. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to everyone. It's been 10 days since a 20-year-old took his father's AR-15 rifle to a campaign event in Butler, Pennsylvania, shot the former president and 2 others, and took the life of an innocent bystander who died protecting his family. We're grateful for the brave law enforcement officers who responded to the heinous attack, and our thoughts and prayers continue to be with the victims and their families. Let me be clear at the outset of today's hearing. The Secret Service has a no-fail mission, and there must be answers and accountability for what occurred. The security failures must be identified and addressed to ensure that they never, ever happen again. That work is already well underway. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Pennsylvania State Police have active and ongoing criminal investigations. The Secret Service has begun an internal investigation. Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, has announced a bipartisan independent law enforcement review. And later this week, Congress will vote on a resolution to establish a task force on the attempted assassination. This committee also has begun its oversight as well. Yesterday, as the chairman indicated, I joined a bipartisan group of committee members on a visit to the Butler Farm Show grounds. We walked the site where the attack occurred. We saw the layout, buildings, and infrastructure for ourselves. We met with local officials and the county sheriff. Today's hearing is the next step in our oversight, and I hope it will be a productive one in keeping with the seriousness of the issue at hand. We must understand what happened in Butler and take corrective action to ensure the security of every Secret Service protectee. I hope to hear from our witnesses today about how state and local law enforcement work with the Secret Service and other federal agencies at these events and where coordination and communication must be improved. While we can have policy differences as Americans, we must be united in condemning political violence in all its forms. There simply is no place for it in our democracy. The attempted assassination is another tragic example of the threat high-powered weapons like the AR-15 pose to our communities and to police officers trying to keep us safe. These weapons have killed regular Americans from all walks of life. Concert goers, church goers, movie goers, grocery shoppers, workers, and yes, even school children. I'm an avid hunter and law-abiding gun owner, but believe strongly that we must do more to keep these weapons off our streets and out of the wrong hands. As we continue our oversight of the events of July 13th, I hope the committee will work at the terrible toll that these weapons are taking and look at them and make some kind of policy decisions to keep them out of the hands of a lot of people who don't deserve them. They are military-style weapons. We use them to our men and women to defend people on the battlefield. Our neighborhoods and our communities are not battlefields. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for holding this hearing and the witnesses for being here today. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record, and without objection, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Kelly, is permitted to sit on the dais and ask questions to the witnesses. I will say that votes just got called, and so what we'll do is let our witnesses do each of their 5 minutes, then we'll go into recess and come back with questions following our vote series. Does that sound good to you, Ranking Member? I'm pleased to have an important panel of witnesses before us today. I ask that our witnesses please rise and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? You may be seated. Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. I would now like to formally introduce our witnesses. Colonel Christopher Paris serves as the Commissioner for the Pennsylvania State Police. In this role, he exercises command, administrative, and fiscal authority over the Pennsylvania State Police, the 10th largest police agency in the United States. Commissioner Paris has served in the Pennsylvania State Police since his enlistment in 1999. Thank you for the support getting to the site yesterday. Mr. Patrick Yos currently serves as the President, National Fraternal Order of Police. In this role, Mr. Yos leads the order and its more than 367,000 law enforcement members in representing police officers and the profession. Prior to taking his current role, Mr. Yos served an impressive 36 years as an active law enforcement officer. I thank the witnesses for being here today, and I now recognize Colonel Paris for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Chairman Green, Ranking Member Thompson, Homeland Security Committee members, good morning. I am Colonel Christopher Paris, Commissioner of the Pennsylvania State Police. I would like to take this opportunity to offer our condolences on the passing of Congresswoman Lee. I would also like to take this opportunity to express our condolences to the Comparator family and offer our continued prayers to Mr. Dutch, Mr. Copenhaver, as well as former President Trump as they continue to recover. I'm humbled to be here today and testify about a tragic incident which has deeply impacted the Butler community, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and our nation. I would like to dedicate my testimony here today to the approximately 6,400 women and men, civilian and enlisted, of the PSP who work tirelessly for Pennsylvania, and it is my honor to lead them. I'd like to offer a perspective that this is very much an ongoing, complex, and dynamic investigation. And each day, as we arrive at day 10 today, I learn multiple new facts as we uncover new information as the investigation progresses. I'd like to offer a point of clarification affirmatively about PSP's role. Prior to the shooting, our role was to support the Secret Service with personnel and assets that they requested. Our operation plan completed to fulfill this responsibility consisted of 32 members, and we had two main responsibilities: a motorcade operation for the transportation with the Secret Service of former President Trump, as well as manning and staffing security posts inside the secure area of the Butler County Farm Show. Additionally, we provided two marked cars with uniformed troopers outside of the secure perimeter to provide roving duties, as the name implies, responding to incidents that may occur as a large gathering of people were moving to the venue. After the shooting, very early after the shooting, I had a conversation with the FBI, wherein the FBI is the responsible investigating agency for the attempted assassination of a former president under federal law. The same actions that led to that also led to the homicide of one Pennsylvanian and the attempted homicide of two additional, as well as the use of force by the Secret Service counter-sniper to neutralize the threat of Mr. Crooks, thus necessitating an officer-involved shooting investigation. So the PSP currently is conducting a criminal investigation parallel to and in concert with the FBI to identify any and all parties criminally culpable under Pennsylvania state law for the homicide and for the attempted homicides. And as I said, we are additionally conducting an investigation into the U.S. Secret Service counter-sniper who neutralized the threat posed by crooks after he opened fire. I've been recently briefed about the Department of Homeland Security's commissioned after-action report. I can tell you that the Pennsylvania State Police will fully cooperate with that investigation, and it's my hope that I can answer some questions here today without sacrificing that ongoing investigation and prove to be of value to the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colonel Paris. I now recognize Mr. Yost for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Green, Representative Thompson, and distinguished members of the House Committee on Homeland Security. My name is Patrick Yost, and I'm the National President of the Fraternal Order Police, the nation's oldest and largest law enforcement labor organization. I'd like to first take this opportunity to recognize a long-term member of Congress and a member of this committee, Sheila Jackson-Lee, for her contribution to great work done here in Washington. I want to thank you for providing me with an opportunity to appear before you today on behalf of the 377,000 members of the Fraternal Order of Police as this committee examines the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump just 10 days ago. Before I begin my testimony, I want to express my admiration for the Secret Service agents who jumped into action and protected the former president. Rarely does the public witness just how selfless these agents are, placing themselves between flying bullets and their protectee. They, along with state and local law enforcement officers on the scene that day, demonstrated extraordinary courage. I also want to extend my thoughts and prayers to the family of Corey Comparator and the others who were injured that day. My testimony today will not be specific to the attempted assassination of President Trump. Instead, I hope to provide a perspective of state and local law enforcement when providing support and assistance to these events. We must remember that the law enforcement mission is a shared mission, and agencies at every level routinely cooperate and collaborate with one another. Law enforcement in our country is highly decentralized, with more than 90% of services provided by state and local agencies through more than 18,000 different jurisdictions. State and local agencies would not be effective without the support of their federal colleagues, and our federal partners would be unable to perform their functions without the assistance of state and local agencies. Anyone suggesting that the United States Secret Service not rely on state and local agencies at these events is simply uninformed. At these events, local law enforcement works under the direction of the United States Secret Service, which must ensure that all agencies involved at the event have a clear understanding of their roles and responsibility. Law enforcement agencies provide valuable community insight that can be crucial in identifying potential risk and issues. They contribute resources, personnel, and support that augments the capabilities of the U.S. Secret Service to ensure that there's adequate staffing and all contingencies are covered. Local law enforcement should be part of the command post and communications center to facilitate real-time information sharing and rapid response to emerging situations. This collaborative planning process ensures that all potential risks are identified and mitigated, and that local officers are fully integrated into timely and coordinated responses. Our presence is a vital part of the security matrix, but the United States Secret Service ultimately is responsible and is the final arbiter of any security matters affecting their protectee and the public. Clear and constant communication between participating agencies and the United States Secret Service is crucial to ensure the security of the protectee and everyone at the event. All this said, there were critical failures of security at the event in Butler. It is important that we learn from these failures to better provide safety and security for our leaders moving forward, as in public also attending these events. In the coming election, we will have extraordinary challenges placed on our Secret Service as they provide security at sites all across this nation over the next 4.5 months. And I'm confident that state and local law enforcement agencies are well prepared and ready to assist the United States Secret Service in this mission. I want to pause for a moment, and I want to flag another issue that often creates unnecessary obstacles for agencies within working together in real time, and that being interoperable communications. In the aftermath of 9/11, Congress wisely established FirstNet to address the voice and data communication failures faced by officers, partners, and first responders. To facilitate full use of FirstNet's advanced capabilities, we strongly urge Congress to ensure that our nation's public safety organizations at all levels of government are aware of and fully leverage the critical communication lifeline. Further, Congress and the FCC must take all necessary steps to guarantee FirstNet's continued success and evolution. In conclusion, close collaboration between Secret Service and their advanced teams and in local law enforcement agencies provide indispensable support that ensures the safety and security of our nation's leaders and the public. These collaborative efforts should exemplify the very best in our interagency cooperation and underscore our collective commitment to national security. I want to thank you for the opportunity to appear here today, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Yos. And Colonel Paris, I just want to make sure I say this. You feel comfortable at any time to say, I'm sorry, this could compromise the investigation. These guys get this all the time. This is classified information. They're accustomed to that. So just, you know, they're gonna be cool with that, I assure you. Members will be recognized by order of seniority when we come back from votes, but we will take a recess and return 10 minutes after the last vote. The committee will come to order. Members will be recognized in order of their seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. An additional round of questioning may be called after all members have been recognized. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Colonel Paris, typically these events, do they typically have two control rooms or two sort of tactical operations areas where the Secret Service is in their sort of spot and the local law enforcement is in their sort of command center? Is that how it's typically done?
I would say from my experience and from state police operations, to include this event as planned in our operations plan, we had integrated communications by having our PSP personnel in the Secret Service command post.
So your person was in there, in that command post on this event?
Yes, sir.
Do you know if the local sheriff had anybody, or the deputies that were also provided, the local guys?
I would be remiss at this point to say I knew an exact listing of everyone in that command post.
The sheriff yesterday told us he did not. Would you expect him to have had somebody there?
So I would say generally, there's a lot of talk about interoperability and communications. The state police, for example, operate our own statewide radio network. So we have the ability to, if we have an incident, a long protracted incident, for example, where we need to patch other agencies in, we have the capability to do that. However, Secret Service, for example, maintains some additional encrypted communications. So the best way to integrate unified command
Is physically present in the
correct,
command
that
site?
would be our.
Yeah,
I
that's
would
how the
expect-
Army does it in the military.
I would expect our commanders to have personnel in there so that we could have radio communication as well as a redundancy in the operations plan with a telephonic backup.
Do you know if in this particular case, I mean, normally they sweep these sites with dogs. Was a K-9 team used here for this event?
I do not know. I have not seen the Secret Service operations plan. I've asked for it. I have yet to receive it. I did double check. That was something that PSP could typically offer to the Secret Service if they requested it. And I did verify that in this event, we did not provide any dogs.
Okay. As I understand it, there wasn't one, but you'd expect one in a situation like this.
So I want to be clear that when the Secret Service interfaces with the state police for whatever protectee and level of protection they're endeavoring to provide, the Secret Service is the lead agency. So as per the earlier statement of 18,000 law enforcement agencies across the United States, it would be very difficult, I would assert, for the Secret Service to operate all across the United States and have each individual agency telling the Secret Service how the operation should be run. They're the lead agency. If that was something that their protocols called for during the initial meeting when preliminary steps and agencies were brought together, that would be something that would be discussed typically.
The AGR building, did your guys on the ground there ever voice concerns to the Secret Service for not putting somebody on that building?
So I suppose the best sequence of events that I can give you is that PSP was notified by email on July 5th about this event. There was an initial planning meeting where we had commanders present on Monday, July 8th. So over Tuesday the 9th and Wednesday the 10th, those commanders that we designated, basically our orders are from the front office, my team on down. You know, we work collaboratively with the Secret Service, collaborate, give them what we can. The final walkthrough occurred on the 11th. Present at that meeting were the two commanders that were tasked with both staffing the security checkpoints on the interior of the secure perimeter, as well as the commander who was going to be in charge of the motorcade. But in addition to that, a PSP area commander was on that walkthrough, holding the rank of major.
Could you share a little bit of insight? I appreciate the timeline, but could you share a little bit, because I only have about a minute.
I apologize.
Yeah, the specific to the AGR building.
So on that walkthrough, our area commander asked specifically who was responsible for the AGR building, and we were told that Butler ESU was responsible for that area by several Secret Service agents on that walkthrough.
Okay. All right. One last quick question. real quick, I mean, I'll let you comment about it. The slope of the roof, would that have prevented a sniper from being up there?
I don't believe so, sir.
Okay, thank you. I yield. I now recognize the ranking member for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Parrish, you talked about your tenure with the Pennsylvania State Police. Have you worked other events where a presidential candidate or the president has come to Pennsylvania?
Yes, I have, sir.
So this would not have been an unusual occurrence to participate?
I ran the numbers. We typically do about 20 missions a year, the low 20s a year in a regular year. We're already in the low 20s this year, being an election year. So our commanders in the field who interface with the Secret Service to plan and provide support are on a routine basis. I wouldn't say an everyday occurrence, but a fairly routine basis.
Okay. So can you walk us through the Pennsylvania State Police's interaction with the Secret Service? You kind of started off giving us from the point of contact that an occurrence was about to happen. Was there anything particular about the Butler, Pennsylvania event that stands out as regular, irregular, or anything?
I would say, not to my knowledge, based on our discussions with our commanders who planned it, it progressed along a normal timeline. They attempted to give the Secret Service, and I believe provided the Secret Service with everything they were requested.
So your role on that day in terms of the state police was what?
So I would classify it as in a support role, and the two main areas of responsibility for the state troopers that were assigned that day were those participating in the motorcade to get former President Trump from his point of landing to the venue in Butler County and back, with several other additional entities that were requested by the Secret Service. And then on site, we had to staff security posts that were determined by the Secret Service. All of those posts were inside of the secure perimeter of the Butler County Farm show.
I guess I was one of those individuals who traveled to Butler. Just for my information, have you had any interaction with the FBI or anything as they look into the investigation as to what you or your men observed on that day?
Yes, we're conducting an investigation largely in concert with and parallel to the Bureau because the actions of crooks have federal legal implications and state law implications.
Okay, thank you. President Yost, in your comments, you talked about the need for communication. You talked about FirstNet. And so we have federal, state, and local law enforcement at an event like what we're talking about in Butler. But in our conversation with some of the locals, not state police, but the sheriff's department and the chief of police in Butler yesterday, those individuals did not have communication with actually state police or Secret Service. Would that, in your professional opinion, be a vulnerability for managing an event like this?
Well, I think we can go back to 9/11 when we identified at that time that the interoperability of different agencies to be able to communicate really was a hindrance. There's an infrastructure in place now to address these interoperabilities, but at the same time, they're not always utilized in every event. I do not have any direct knowledge whether that was the issue here, but I can tell you it is a common issue in law enforcement and an ability for our agencies not to be able to communicate. Not that the technology is not necessarily there, it's because that they're not always incorporated.
Yeah, you know, we passed legislation mandating obviously FirstNet interoperability, and we tied funding to make sure that that happens. But here we are looking at this situation, and we picked up some valuable information that we're still not where we need to be on that. I would think that Colonel, the role of the state police is invaluable, but it appeared in talking with some of the local officials, as you say, it's just, you're not primary, you're kind of secondary in that role, that we need to somehow, as a committee, look at how do we enhance the overall mission so that we have no gaps. So I look forward to the work of this committee, identifying the gaps, look at the after-action review to close those gaps. So just to tell you one, Butler, Pennsylvania has no permitting process for events of that size. So you can announce it and hold it, and local government doesn't really have anything to do with it. And we were assured by local government that they would try to fix that. That they said we have to be more involved in events of this size so that if this was not the best venue, then that permitting could have gotten engaged and suggested an alternate venue, those kind of things. So thank you very much. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Chairman McCall for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank you for the site visit that we had at Butler, Pennsylvania yesterday. It was very eye-opening, educational. I agree with the ranking member's comments in terms of, you know, after 9/11, after 9/11, connecting the dots and federal, state, and local working together was the answer. I led a joint terrorism task force when I worked at the Department of Justice, and I also was involved in national security events, so I kind of know how these things operate. My question is to Colonel Paris. It's standard practice that the lead federal agency will come in and meet with the state and locals regarding the security plan before the event, prior to the event. Sir, did you participate or did your department participate in that?
So I did not participate. As I stated earlier, there were two commanders dedicated to those two primary roles, the motorcade and the staffing of the posts on site within the secure perimeter, as well as a state police area commander. So just as a way of background, our area commander that covers multiple troops in that area of the state, out of nearly 5,000 troopers, there are only 4 area commanders. So that major was present for the walkthrough on the 11th.
And were your troopers assigned inside the perimeter or outside?
Inside, sir.
Inside. And was the outside within the jurisdiction of the local police?
So just as a point of clarification, there were 2, on the operations plan, there were 2 marked cars that were assigned roving duties, which would primarily, as the name implies, be outside of the secure perimeter on roadways, responding to incidents that potentially could occur as a result of a congregation of that many people. But
So we saw, we actually walked onto the roof where the sniper was. A clear, eyes-on, clear shot of the president. A tree blocked the Secret Service's view. This kid did some investigation. He had a drone out there days prior, got an aerial surveillance of the premises. And that position was probably the best position outside the perimeter, as far as I could tell. There was also a water tower that would have been a perfect spot for Secret Service. Were you aware of any presence of Secret Service in this water tower?
I was not.
And you're aware of what I'm talking about?
I am familiar. I physically flew out there on Saturday the 13th. It was still very much an active crime scene, so I did not walk the roofs, but I did.
On the adjacent building, we got a tour of that as well, where I believe the local police were positioned. There were 3 windows. The first one had a plain view of where the sniper would be. However, they were stationed in the second and third windows. Are you familiar with this at all?
I am not, from the standpoint that I have not seen the Secret Service's operations plan, and our deference would be to them to assign Butler ESU
Right.
according
And
to.
they were apparently local counter snipers Do you know if they should have been assigned to the rooftop?
I would defer to there are many ways that you can cover. Obviously, positioning people on the rooftop would be one of those.
No, and going to the actual site, way too close. He should never have been allowed to get on top of that building. And I don't know how, and I know he was on your radar inside the perimeter. You seem to have lost him, and somehow he finds his way up to the rooftop unimpeded until a local law enforcement officer crawls on top of the roof and looks at him, and he points his AR-15 at him. My question to you is, what was the communication like that day? Typically, Secret Service has one channel for them, the other channel for state and locals. Was there any communication to identify, hey, this is not a local police officer, this is in fact an unidentified individual on the rooftop? Was that communicated to the Secret Service?
So my belief, as I sit here today, is that we did have integrated communications from members that were inside of the Secret Service command post. Completely deferential to the ongoing nature of the investigation. I have an understanding of a sequence of events, but I would like to draw a distinction between a sequence of events, meaning...
So my theory is that they thought maybe he was an officer, but then they find out he's not. The thing I find interesting is that the counter-sniper Secret Service, within seconds of the shots on the president, kills a suspect. That tells me he had him in his sights. Maybe he was not aware of who the individual was not identified. But I know within seconds after the shots were fired at the president, the threat was eliminated. Lastly, I just want to end with this. This was actually astonishing, and I want to get your confirmation. He had a detonation device with him, and 2 of his bombs were located in his car that was parked on the other side of the perimeter. Seems to me a good theory would be that he was going to kill the president and then detonate his car, causing a diversion, and then escape from the crime scene. Are you aware of any of this?
I am aware of the presence of the device on his person. We were aware of that very early on, and that was a serious tactical consideration in the hours in the immediate aftermath as we worked that crime scene. But to your point about his ultimate theory or what his ultimate motivation was, that remains under investigation.
And he had a rangefinder on him as well. That's a big red flag. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Violence has never been the answer. And I thank both of you for your service in law enforcement and testifying today. Violence has never been the answer. Not on a certain day in January and not on a day in July. I remember I was 12 years old, and my dad, I was on the way to school on a cold day in January, and my dad, who was a cop, stopped me as I was about to leave, and he wanted me to watch the television. His guy had just lost a presidential election, and some young kid from Arkansas was about to be sworn in as the new president of the United States. My dad was burned. He really liked George Bush. He did not like Bill Clinton. But he told me to stop and watch the television coverage of the inauguration because he said, look at that, son. He said, that's what makes us so special. My guy lost, this guy's getting sworn in, and not a shot has been fired. That's what makes us different. Violence has never been the answer. It's despicable that somebody thought they could take a shot at the former president and change the course of history. We don't know much about the political beliefs of this individual. We know he was a 20-year-old male, registered Republican, gun enthusiast, also had researched the DNC, also had researched President Biden, also had researched leader Hakeem Jeffries. We don't know what led this madman to try and kill the former president. But it's despicable. And the people who went to that rally deserved to hear, without violence, the candidate that they were supporting. Commissioner Paris, I'm sorry this happened to your community. I'm sorry this happened to the person who died and the persons who've been wounded. I just want to understand, though, because we are a country that is armed to the teeth, how many firearms were within the perimeter, just by a back-of-the-envelope estimate?
The only firearms of which I'm aware that were inside of the perimeter were those in the possession of law enforcement.
And would you estimate that was hundreds or dozens?
I would only feel comfortable not having seen the Secret Service operations plan about the PSP members that were inside of the perimeter.
Okay. How many rounds did the shooter fire before he was killed? Do you know?
I believe that the number is 8. 8 casings have been recovered.
Okay. I also understand the emotions around this assassination attempt, but I am not going to allow some, and I say some, the chairman of this committee is a serious legislator who wants answers. Some are not. And some are trying to rewrite what has happened in our country over the last 8 years, erase what happened in this building on January 6th. One member of this body in Congress said the Republican district attorney in Butler County should immediately file charges against Joseph Biden for inciting assassination. Another said Congressman Scalise, Justice Kavanaugh, and now President Trump, for years, Democrats and their allies have recklessly stoked fears, calling President Trump and others threats to democracies. Another said Democrats and liberals in the media have called Trump a fascist. They've compared him to Hitler. They've tried to lock him up. A radical shift in what has really happened in our country. In fact, the former president's current vice presidential nominee is the one who said that Donald Trump might be America's Hitler, might be a cynical a-hole, cultural heroin he's responsible for, nauseous and reprehensible. I joined the chairman in seeking unity as the antidote to political violence. Unity as the antidote to political violence. But we're not going to erase and rewrite and allow some to reincarnate themselves as victims of what happened. We can't let this ever happen again. We must arm law enforcement and have better security perimeters. But in this country, violence has never been the answer. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize the Vice Chairman of the committee, Mr. Guest, for his 5 minutes. Mr. Guest, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and gentlemen, thank you for both being here today. You both classified as what happened on July 13th as critical failures. I would expand that and say it was a colossal failure. And I think you have both stated that the ultimate responsibility for what occurred that day falls upon the Secret Service. Colonel Paris, I know that your officers were there in a support role. You were following the operational plan set out by Secret Service. You testified that the primary responsibilities for your officers were motorcade and then the interior perimeter, and that you had 2 roving officers there, really just out there to provide support if necessary and called upon. You mentioned earlier that you went to the scene on the 13th, and thank you for going there and being a part of that. And you also testified earlier that you have not been provided the operational plan by the Secret Service. Is that correct?
That's correct. We haven't received it yet.
When did you request that?
I'd have to go back and check in the earlier part of the investigation. That was just something that we asked for as a matter of course. We were not told no. We just, to date, have yet to receive it.
And that would be important, would it not? If you're going to investigate what happened on that day, the operational plan, that is the starting point for all the events that later transpired. Is that correct?
Well, I don't want to overstate the role of the state police here is to investigate the 3 Pennsylvanians that were shot and the use of force by the Secret Service counter sniper. To the extent that we need to know the sequence of events leading up to that, we obviously would like to know as much as we can, but it's not our role to do an after-action report on the Secret
Well, but all the shootings occurred simultaneously. The same shot that struck President Trump, one of those shots killed one of your fellow citizens, and 2 others were injured. And so you can't separate the two. This is one investigation into a shooting that occurred in which one of your citizens were killed, 2 more were fatally injured, in which the president himself was struck. And so the fact that the Secret Service is stonewalling your investigation, that they're not providing you this information. We saw the testimony yesterday from the Secret Service director where she refused to answer questions and has now resigned. I find that to be especially troubling. We have the Secret Service not wanting to cooperate with Congress, not wanting to cooperate with a fellow law enforcement agency, and I personally find that troubling. As we look, and as you are aware from speaking to your officers that were there physically on the scene that day, did Secret Service, did they have any drones in the air so that they could have an eye in the sky and see what was happening to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, I am not aware that they were using drones, but that
And
I haven't seen the operations.
does your agency have drones?
We do maintain some drones.
So if Secret Service would have requested your agency to fly drones that day, you would have been able to do so. Is that correct?
We would have endeavored to try to honor that request. Yes, sir.
And you testified that you've been to the scene of the shooting. Did you see the water tower that's located approximately 100 yards from the building where the shooter fired those shots?
I did see it, sir.
And would it have been possible to have put an officer, and again, that's not your responsibility to do that, that's the Secret Service's, but would it have been possible to put an officer there looking down on the scene of the rally and the building where the shooter occurred? Would that have been something that would have been possible to do?
Presuming that there's a way to access the water tower. I didn't walk over. I was probably several hundred yards away, so I can't say that I could.
And if you had an officer up there, that would have provided you a strategic viewpoint of the events that were transpiring below, correct?
I would agree. Tactics, height gives a tactical advantage. Yes, sir.
And then I want to ask you also about the roof where the shooter was located. You said you didn't go on the roof, but you viewed the roof. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
The Secret Service director, prior to her resignation, said that she did not put anybody on the roof because it had a sloped roof that would have created a safety concern. Now, I was in Butler, Pennsylvania yesterday with many members of this committee. My fellow member, Carlos Jimenez, who is 70 years old, and I guess he doesn't mind me saying that since he has put that information out there. There's video of him easily traversing the roof, walking across the roof, and even though he is some 50 years older than the shooter. And so my question is, do you agree with the assessment of the former Secret Service director that the roof was so sloped that it created safety concerns?
I can't agree with that statement, sir.
All right, thank you very much. I'm out of time, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Correa for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you and the ranking member for putting together the trip to Butler yesterday. Good, eye-opening trip. And Colonel Paris, thank you for hosting us out there. I certainly hope that the Secret Service does cooperate with us in our investigation as to what went wrong. Secret Service has to be 100% correct all the time. There's small force, 2,300 plus maybe 1,300. So you local, state, local police officers are the force multiplier. And to hear you say that miscommunication was an element here is unacceptable. We talked earlier to the fact that FirstNet was put together post 9/11. It's a little bit over 20 years ago. And to hear that we still don't have the technology for people on the ground to talk with each other is of concern. It's even of greater concern to me when I was taking a tour of that farm in Butler, Pennsylvania yesterday. I had local law enforcement officers, local electeds coming to me, whispering to me, there's more here to the story. We need to talk about what actually happened. To have people that were on the ground there concerned afraid of stepping forward is unacceptable. To tell us of other failures that maybe this committee does not know about yet, that were part of what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, is unacceptable. I asked one of the officers, safety officers, could you talk to the Secret Service? Said, no, we can't communicate. Took us 15 minutes to communicate with them. Local elected official who said, I have other stories that I need to talk to you about when you have a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, we're 4.5 months away from this election. Pennsylvania is a battleground state. You will have these kinds of events again. And to know that we don't have the facts, let alone execute a plan to fix the holes, is unacceptable to our democracy and to our country. We can talk about the facts. The facts are a lot of things went wrong. Let's talk about how to fix it. Fix it now. I think we start with accepting the fact that things went wrong and that we need more resources. Colonel Paris, your volunteers, your officers that you put on the line to help the Secret Service, are they actually compensated somewhere for their overtime, their extra time they're out there?
They're in a paid status, yes. They're not, we assign them to those duties, and if they incur overtime as a result of the contract, the contractual bargaining agreement, we pay them.
So let me ask you something in the minute and a half I have left. One of the local officers there, after we spoke a while, I said, well, let me summarize what you just told me. You're asking me who's in charge. And he asked me, yeah, I want to know who's in charge. I said, well, let's talk some more. And he said, Lou, we don't know if it's the campaign or the Secret Service that's in charge here. Said, if I called for a row of dump trucks to be put up behind the stand, it wouldn't happen because the optics would not be good for a campaign rally. I want to know who is in charge protecting our national candidates. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to see if we can ask those tough questions. This is not a Democrat or Republican issue. This is about trying to come up with some rules, protocol to make sure this does not happen again. After the events, we can sit here, we can point fingers at each other and talk about partisanship. It's not going to fix our democracy or electoral system. Mr. Chairman, I do hope we go back and talk to a lot of those folks who are not here today, who wanted to talk, who weren't invited, and a lot of people, even if we invite them, are not going to talk. Because frankly speaking, they want to keep their heads down as the shooting continues. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Bishop for 5 minutes of.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel Paris, are you aware whether any law enforcement officer or officers was or were posted in the second floor window of the AGR building?
I am aware, yes, sir.
And what is the answer?
To my knowledge, there were 2 posted there from Butler ESU.
And you said Butler ESU. What does the acronym ESU stand for?
Emergency Services Unit. It's a team that's comprised of multiple agencies that pool resources on a county or several county basis in order to enhance capabilities and training and be able to respond. Basically, a mutual aid agreement is my understanding of it.
Is it sort of like a SWAT team?
They are trained in SWAT tactics, to my knowledge.
So
yes.
how many ESU officers were posted to that second floor window?
So I am aware that 2 were in the building, but again, I have not seen the Secret Service operations plan.
Do you know, well, you say in the building. Were they in a window, a window out onto the scene?
From briefings that I have been given, I was told they were in a window, yes, sir.
Did they remain on post?
I was told that at a certain point, they began searching along with other local officers in the immediacy before after Crooks had been identified as suspicious by them.
By them?
My understanding is that they identified Crooks for not matriculating. He never, to my knowledge, Crooks never made it through the secure perimeter into the venue space itself. That he was identified by those members as suspicious, in part because of that. And then at some point, he produced the rangefinder, which heightened that suspicion.
So Representative Crane took a video on site yesterday. I'd like staff to put that up. It's just very short. There's a few seconds. They can do that. If I understand correctly, this is from the second-story window of the AGR building. You can see that window comes out from the sash and swings out to the right. There's an aerial photo right after Crooks was killed, where Crooks's body's on the roof, and that window was open. Was it from this vantage point that those ESU officers spotted Crooks?
I don't know that particular window, but my understanding is from a second-story window is where he was initially spotted.
Okay, so are you then saying that, to your knowledge, those ESU officers left the location where they could look out the window to go in search of this person?
That is my understanding.
So sometime before the time between the time he was spotted on the ground and identified as someone suspicious until the shooting, they had left that post to go look for him. Is that what you're saying?
My understanding is yes, along with other municipal officers that responded to that area. And that's based on interviews that we've conducted, and I want to be very clear that I don't want to establish a timeline minute by minute because we don't have that yet.
I think that's revelatory. I haven't heard that information. I did hear before that and there's a local news station. Well, there's a local news station report from July 17 that says that local law enforcement were told they couldn't be responsible for securing the AGR building during the Trump rally. And of course, you've testified a moment ago, or earlier in this hearing, that it was your understanding that the meeting with the Secret Service on the site was that ESU was going to handle the AGR building. Which is it? Do you know?
My understanding is what my initial answer was.
Okay. You also, in response to Mr. McCall, you started to say something. You were saying that you did have integrated comms, and you were saying you were deferring to the ongoing investigation, but you have an understanding of the sequence, and then he cut you off and went on to another question. Do you know what you were about to say? Do you remember that?
Just that we had members of PSP inside of the Secret Service command post, and we were maintaining communication with our people.
Had ESU maintained position in that window overlooking the roof, isn't it true that they would have had a clean shot at Mr. Crooks as he was ascending the roof to his shooting position?
I'm not prepared to say that because I don't know the exact timeline of events.
But it's your understanding, though, that they were no longer in that room where they had been previously overlooking the building at the time he was ascending the roof. Is that correct?
Could you repeat that question?
The ESU officers were no longer in that room where they could look out the window and oversee the roof as that video shows.
I believe they were actively searching along with additional municipal officers for Mr. Crooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time's expired.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Mr.
For 5
Chairman.
minutes.
And thank you to our witnesses for joining us today as we convene to discuss the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump and its profound implications on our nation's political landscape. It is imperative that we recognize the growing threats to our homeland. The failure of the Secret Service to protect former President Donald Trump must be thoroughly investigated and addressed to ensure such an incident never happens again. Violence has no place in political discourse, regardless of our philosophical differences, our parties, or our beliefs. We must stand united against such actions and uphold the principles of democracy and respect. What happened on that day was an incredible breach, a threat to our nation because one of our leaders were placed in harm's way. Secret Service has a principal role, and that is to provide protection for our party leaders, whether they're Republican, Democrat, or other. Rather, they are someone that we agree with or someone we disagree with. It's not a luxury. It's a necessity. It's an imperative. And while we all have lots of questions, it appears abundantly clear that the two of you, and while we appreciate you being here, own no responsibility to the breach. And I respect the fact that the questions that are coming to you are very difficult for you to answer because you have limited facts. But I do appreciate your presence. I appreciate your leadership. I appreciate what you do. And for all the men and women in uniform, we thank you for putting your lives on the line to protect us. I will ask this general question. If you were in charge, can you say what you might have done differently?
I would defer to the Secret Service from the standpoint that our expertise in the Pennsylvania State Police is not primarily focused on full-time dignitary protection, sir. I would endeavor generally to try and put whatever resources and partnerships in place to maintain and ensure the safest event we possibly could.
Do you believe that the coordination failed between agencies?
Again, I can only comment on the state police portion at this point. We continue to learn more 10 days in, and I have not seen the Secret Service operations plans.
Mr. Yost, can you join us and share any light in your expertise on
Yes,
where we are and how can we make sure this absolutely never happens again, regardless of who might be at the podium? A president is a president is a president.
I could not agree with you more. In this situation, if I'm speaking on behalf of local law enforcement or state law enforcement, I would say that, again, the primary responsibility of making these calls, making these decisions, and making the operations plans is going to be the Secret Service. As I mentioned earlier, there are some 19,000 agencies across this country. It would be impossible to have any continuity or any consistency with what we do in protecting, our leaders. So Secret Service would have to play a huge role in this part. If you're asking me personally what I would have done different, well, obviously I look at an assessment of the situation and look at all of the elevated positions that were in place. They should have been part of a contained area. But that's just my own personal view of not seeing news reports and not physically being on site.
I have never served in any form of law enforcement, but I think I would have figured that that perimeter should have been tighter. I think I could have figured out that there's no way that that building where the shooter sat, laid, and aimed should not have had snipers on top of it as well, negating any opportunity for a shooter to be there. Notwithstanding that there should have been a sweep of the area, we should have had our people on that building as a point of view for a former president. And as I said, a president, a president, a president, a former president, a former president, a former president, a cabinet secretary, a leader. We deserve to have answers to these questions, because when we don't have answers, those who would rather divide and create theater by saying things that aren't true and they know aren't true, distorting facts and trying to suggest that somehow people played an active role. Listen, the American people deserve the truth. And so I am imploring that we have somebody at these tables that can answer the questions, the good, the tough, the uncomfortable, the comfortable, because the American people deserve to know. This is something that should have never happened. And we as a committee, in a most bipartisan fashion, should stand together to make sure that we send a message always, that we will always protect our leaders, whether we agree with them or not. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Jimenez, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel Paris, you said the United States Secret Service, Penn State Police was there, Butler ESU was there. Any other law enforcement agency there?
According to the operations plan that PSP put together, there were elements from Butler County Sheriff. Deputy sheriffs were on some of those interior posts, and thus they were on our...
I just need the answer.
Yeah, I apologize. There are the additional ones that I could name would be Butler County Sheriffs were in our operations plan. Pittsburgh City Police provided assets to the motorcade, and I believe Allegheny County Police also.
You said that you were in the Incident Command Center, that your agency was in the Incident Command Center with the Secret Service?
Yes, sir.
Well, all the other agencies in that command center?
I believe that some of those agencies were represented, but I can't definitively tell you.
We need to find the answer to that. It was Butler ESU in that command center?
I was told at one point that there was a representative in there. How long and over what period, I'm not sure. I'm aware of 3.
So the agency that's in charge of the outside perimeter, actually the agency in charge of the greatest threat, because when you stand at the podium, and I stood there, and when you look, all you had to do is look around. There's the greatest threat right there. It's 100 yards away, it's elevated, direct line of fire to the president. I stood on that roof, no problem standing on that roof, and yes, I am 70 years old, okay? So the timeline is very important here. If, in fact, they thought that Mr. Brooks was so suspicious that they actually pulled the ESU counter-snipers away, because there were counter-snipers, what I understand, in that window, a way to look for him. And from what I understand the timeline, it's about 20 minutes before the president came out. Was that information relayed to the Secret Service, that they were looking for a suspicious individual, and that people had been pulled away to look for that suspicious individual? Was that relayed to the Secret Service?
I believe that it was.
And was that relayed to the Secret Service, the team that surrounds the president himself?
I can't answer that.
Well, if it wasn't, that's another big mess up. And I can tell you, this is just one of a bunch of mess ups that I've seen. One of them, question that I have is, why in the world was that team from ESU in the building to begin with? Why weren't they on a rooftop? And it was a hot day, right? And so that's another question that I'm going to, why were you assigned inside a building when you have a little window, it's like this big, right? And your line of sight out of that window, unless you stick your head out of the window, is pretty limited, your view. So why were you inside, not outside? Who said for them to be inside and not outside? What did the Secret Service tell you were inside the perimeter, right?
Yes.
For the most part.
You're saying,
you were inside the perimeter.
Me personally, or the?
No, I'm saying your agency was inside
Yes.
the perimeter. But actually the biggest threat was outside the perimeter. And so who developed the plan to protect the outside of the perimeter? There's only one agency. That's the United States Secret Service. Because you really can't ask the local agency to do that because they're not in the business of dignitary protection. They don't do it all the time. You don't do it all the time. They do it all the time. So, Mr. Chairman, we're going to need those other agencies to come in. We need a timeline. Who said what to who, and what the action that was taken. You know, one thing that I noticed in another video, and I've got to find out if it's true, and it appears to be true, is that the snipers on the south side reposition to look to the north side. And I want to know what the timeline for that was. How far in advance were the snipers, the counter-snipers on the south side told, hey, you need to look at a threat on the north side? And how much time was there between that and then the shots being fired? Do you have any information on that?
I do not have a specific timeline.
Okay, and those are that's the information that we need. It's not unusual to have people on different frequencies. Actually, you have to because you have so many people, but you have to have everybody in the same place so they communicate with each other. So we need to know if everybody that was in charge or had responsibility for protecting not only the interior perimeter, but outside the perimeter, if they were all in that incident command center, and if they
participate, and why haven't you seen the plan?
So as my answer prior on the record, I've asked for it. The state police has asked for it. We have yet to receive it. And my understanding is that our walkthrough with our commanders and our area commander was to delineate what our responsibilities were, and we endeavored to fulfill those responsibilities.
Who was the Secret Service agent in charge of the advance team?
I don't know the name of the agent.
How was PSP supposed to communicate with Secret Service on the advance team?
You mean in the planning leading up to it? So my understanding is, as is typical, we're notified. We were notified by email on July 5th. The meeting on July 8th, Monday, was to get all of those partners together to exchange information, how they could communicate with one another, and then the planning took place from there.
Could you provide our committee a copy of all those communications, Colonel Pierce?
So I will check with our legal counsel. I mean, Pennsylvania has multiple state statutes that cover investigative plans or law enforcement sensitive information.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, one more thing, if I may. Trump's Secret Service protection could be removed under Benny Thompson's proposed legislation. This legislation was introduced while the politically weaponized government was prosecuting former President Donald Trump. This would leave him at risk. I'd also like to state for the record for this committee that over 140 inmates are murdered in prison every single year. This is a dangerous place, prison is, and of course, 8% of violence in prison leads to murder of inmates. This